Hello, everyone. Welcome to TRICON. Today, we're going to talk about AD security for junior sysadmins in an SMB environment. So my name is Hermon Kidane. I'm from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. I am here to share what I've been learning about AD security for the past 1 year. So this talk is about resource and experience sharing for on-premises Active Directory sysadmins. So this talk is not an expert advice or demonstration of tools. So I recommend that you take some of the concepts that we're going to discuss here and do your own research, right? So what's an AD or Active Directory? There's a good talk by Jake Hildreth and James Coira at Wild West Hacking Fest in 2023. I recommend you check that out. So an Active Directory is like your phone book or contact list for your users and computers. Active Directory provides a methodology to store your directory information of objects. The other thing is, among other things, it also serves as a legislative and executive part of your environment. So whenever we want to create a policy and enforce them, we can use group policies. So in that sense, it operates as an legislative and executive part of your environment. So before we actually go ahead and talk about some of the practical steps that you can take to secure your AD environment, then we should be talking about two things. The first thing is having a redundant domain controllers. That's really important. So your backups aren't your redundancy, right? So don't make the mistake of taking your backups or your redundancy. Instead, you need to have multiple domain controllers so in production, so that if something goes bad in your production, then you can have a fault tolerance, right? So the other thing is building a test lab or an AD test lab that you could play with, implement different things and check different stuff. So I recommend that you build, if possible, to build an AD lab that closely mimics your production environment so that you can test some of the things that we're going to be discussing, right? There are different tools that you could use to build that kind of labs. I have linked some of them here. You could check those out. So, right, let's talk about the practical steps that you can take to secure your AD. The first one is the account-related conflicts. So this include one of the things under the configurations is the password policy. So when we talk about password policy, links trumps complexity, right? So should always pick links over complexity. So there's a good read here by Malware Jake that I recommend you check it out. You check that out. So, but essentially having 15 or more characters in your passphrase or password is really essential to prevent your AD or your local sum from storing them in Lanman hash. For those of you that are not familiar with Lanman hash, it's a type of hash that's really weak and easily crackable. So I recommend you use the 15 or more characters password. So the other thing is having using a fine-grained password policy. So you could have different password policy for your different types of users. So for instance, your typical user workstation users may not have the same password requirements as your server admins. So you can segment the type of users based on their privileges and different categories. So the other thing is having an account lockup policy. So we could call this as rate limiting. So we could defend against brute force attacks with this specific policies. But be aware that this doesn't actually block every password attacks. You still will be susceptible to attacks like password spraying attacks. So the other thing is having a password age with minimum of 1 year. So this actually, if you're using a really small number of days or month for your password age, then your users probably would be fatigued from it. So they would abandon your good password policy and use a really weak password. So I recommend using a 1 year age password or at a minimum 6 months. The other thing I would recommend is checking out size benchmark for your password and other policies as well. Right. So one of the last concepts with the account related configs is using group managed accounts, group managed service accounts, GMSs, or wherever possible. Like not every application supports group managed service accounts, but wherever possible, I recommend you use that because group managed service accounts have a really long passwords, 120 characters, and the domain controller by itself manage it. So we have an automated way of changing passwords, updating passwords, that kind of stuff. So I recommend you implement those wherever possible. The other thing is removing service principal names from user accounts if you have one. So if you have a service principal names SPNs attached to your user accounts, easily attacked with tool attacks like Kerberos thing. So I recommend you remove those. And service principal names are really meant for service accounts. So the other not Active Directory related, but account related controls that you can implement is labs. So if you're using local admin, the same local admin password for every workstation out there, it's really a bad idea, right? It's really not good in this day and age. So I recommend you use something like Labs, local admin password solution by Microsoft, really at the best price, which is free. So if you're using the same passwords, the issue here is that if one of your workstation, let's say one of your workstation local admin is compromised, right? So if you're using the same local admin password, that means every account is also compromised, right? Or every workstation that you have is possibly compromised. So you want to avoid that and implement something like Labs. So the interesting part, one of the interesting part of this talk would be auditing AD, right? So for someone new to AD security, and if you're trying to learn about AD security, auditing is really a good place to start. And I recommend doing that even on a test lab level, even if you don't have a production environment that you could implement it on. So you can use different tools like Pinkcastle being my favorite and others as well. But these tools actually go ahead and read from your Active Directory environment. So they read the configurations and they check them out against the standard benchmarks if you're actually implementing a good configuration or not. And they just simply report that back to you. They bring no change to your environment. So they have no write action. They're just read only. So you could relax there. So once we get the report now, we could go ahead and implement the remediations. But before we actually go ahead and implement that in production, we need to test them out, right? So another thing I would like to point out here is security is a process and you can't really solve everything overnight, right? So it's the continuous effort to remediate, and just simply growing your security maturation as time goes by, right? So try to prioritize your remediations by severity and breadth of exposure. That way you can have a successful AD security maturation process. The other thing to do is documentation. Documentation is really important. So I recommend that you actually document the remediation that you're going to implement on your production. If you don't have a documentation system or template that you already have in your environment, then I recommend this template. Now, there is an example here that I have linked here, that I have put here, and that is Pinkcastle, a snippet of a Pinkcastle report. So with this particular health checkpoint, it's telling us that we have Intel and version 1 and LAN-MAN protocols enabled. So it's simply pointing that it's a bad idea to do that in this case. So we could read about the technical explanation as someone new to the AD security. We can go ahead and read the technical explanation. We can explore more about it on the internet, right? So also there's a device solution we could take from here. We could test that in our test lab environment. We could also dig more in the internet, right? So keep in mind though, at the very bottom, if you can see, there is a warning, right? So with this particular one, it's telling us this will break production if we have a really old Linux machine or older Windows machine, like older than Windows Vista. So if we actually do have that, we can segment those out so that our production still goes on and we don't have an issue. So one thing I would say, if you take only one thing from this talk, I would say don't test in production. Just don't, right? Right. So, like you want to build a continuous life cycle of auditing, remediating. So build that up as you go on, and you would have a really solid way of actually auditing and remediating your Active Directory environment. Now, another really important aspect of this talk, from this talk, is account tiering. So whenever we think about security is best achieved with multiple layers of defenses, right? So which we typically call defense in depth. So we want to have multiple layers of security around our Active Directory and our accounts, so that if one object is compromised, we don't, then by default, not the whole environment is not compromised, right? So we want to build those security layers out so that we have a better security overall, even though one of our users is compromised. So let's talk about what privileged accounts are before we go ahead and talk about the security controls that we can implement against privileged accounts. So privileged accounts or groups are accounts that have powerful permissions, we could say. So our AD admins have powerful permissions, and they could bring nearly any change to our environment, right? Those are the ones we call privileged accounts. So we all know with great power comes great responsibility. So we want to reflect that in our deployments. So AD admin accounts should not be used for day-to-day tasks. In fact, you should have multiple accounts for your administrators or help desk support folks. So improper handling of delegations can be really dangerous and may lead to serious security flaws, right? So your attackers can map different attack paths through different tools like Bloodhound. So right now, when we talk about tiering, we use three-tier architecture. So the first one being tier 0, that's one being the most where the highest privilege accounts and objects reside. So we call it the identity or the control plane. So if you don't know where to start, you could use a tier 0 table made by SpectreOps. I recommend you check that out. For your tier 1 objects, typically this includes your enterprise server and applications and the administrators that administrate those, right? So with your tier 2, that's your user workstation and devices, and your administrators that administrate those. So one thing I would really like to emphasize is you must use multiple accounts for your IT techs or sysadmins and database administrators. If you have a help desk support technician, then that person should have one account for day-to-day tasks, an account for user workstation or tech support. If that person also is responsible for server administration, they have to have a different account. So if you could see here on the chart, then our tier 0 accounts can only access our tier 0 objects or workstation computers like domain controllers, right? So your tier 1 accounts can only access tier IT server objects like your database servers, application servers, that kind of stuff. And with your tier 2 accounts, then they can only access user desktops. Now, the other thing with privilege accounts is using privilege access workstation. So these are workstations that you could use only for privileged accounts. So for your, say, tier 0 assets, right? So this minimizes the risk of having credential theft, and you have a better control and security measures again with these workstations, right? You don't use them for day-to-day tasks, web browsing, or that kind of stuff, just using them for privilege access workstation, and only specific accounts can access and log into this workstation. So you could deploy those. I have linked many like great resources regarding all the things that we're talking, and we're going to talk about at the last slide. So I recommend you check that out. So the other thing is implementing protected user group on your admin accounts. That could be tricky at times. So I recommend using PowerPack that was developed by Jake Gildress from Trimax Security. So you could ease your way into group protected user group implementation. Now, not related to account tiering, but let's talk about allow listing and deny listing, right? So allow listing is difficult in an SMB environment, at least for me, right? So but if you're able to do that, that would be really, really great and would be a huge security factor in your environment. But if you cannot do that, then I would recommend having at least deny listing. So you need to prevent leaving out the land attacks. So typically your users don't need these tools, right? Or other tools that you could come up with. So I recommend having an application control over those. You could use something like UpLocker or the WDAC or your AV usually have those application control setups. Now, so another important aspect is deploying decoys or deceptions. So cyber deceptions are a great way to really slow down and confuse attackers. So they can also provide us a good method, a good way to detect attacks better. So the idea here is to actually have your detection time and reaction time should be less than the attack time, right? So before the attacker actually becomes successful in their attack and compromising your environment, then you can detect them faster and you could respond to them faster. So you just make the attacker cry, right? That's great. So I recommend John Strand's cyber deception class for this one. But essentially, you can have different high privilege accounts like with no logo on honey computers. You can build a honey computer like having a Windows Server like with Windows Server 2008 or 2003. So the attacker would think that you would be drawn in more into that because they think there is more flaws or vulnerabilities in that in older versions of OS, so they would be drawn into that. We would waste their time. In the meanwhile, we're actually detecting them faster. So there's a great project that I have shared, Deploy Deception. You could go ahead and check that out. But there is one example here. We can build a domain admin with no login workstation. They cannot log in or access any workstation or server in our environment, but they pose as a domain admin. So that serves as a good decoy user so that it serves as a tripwire for our environment. Now, lastly, I would like to talk about community and mentorship, right? So in this journey, what I really found was a really good way to build your knowledge and your practice and your skills is having a mentor, right? So they can help you in mapping out a practical path. They can encourage you, motivate you to keep going, and you can learn from their experience. Or if you're not able to find a mentor, then I would simultaneously, if you're able to find a mentor, that's good. But whether you find a mentor or not, I would recommend joining a community so that you have a good support and you can learn from them. You can ask, you can actually help out as well. That's a good way to join the security community as well. So I recommend BHIS Discord community, also Wednesday Offensive Rate Siege communities. I recommend you check those out or find a community or a mentor over LinkedIn, right? So the next thing that I would recommend doing is learning about AD security more. By no means is this everything about AD security. So learning about that or Azure AD. So you could also learn about attack simulation or emulation with tools like Atomic Red Team, Caldera. You could also learn about detecting events with your SIEM, like follow industry leaders like Sean McCoff, founder of AD Security, and just have fun with your lab, right? Build a test lab, nuke it, then deploy another lab, something like GoAD, and just play around with it. So these are the references that I have shared. If you have any questions, you're welcome. You could reach me through this links through the links that I have shared here. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Jake Hildreth, for helping me out with this talk.
TriMark Vision is the next evolution in the identification of security issues across all your Active Directory environments. The TriMark Risk Score is based on real-world expertise of TriMark's industry-leading Active Directory and Microsoft Cloud security experts. Most importantly, TriMark Vision helps you to answer the questions facing your Active Directory security posture today, such as what risk do I have in my environment? What actionable steps can I take today, tomorrow, this week to best mitigate my risk of an attack on my Active Directory? What should I be most concerned about within my Active Directory forest where it concerns potential attack vectors? What is the current security posture of all my AD forests? TriMark Vision, visibility at the speed of operations.